All right, today we're jumping into an event that didn't just, create a new country. This thing completely redrew the map of global power and totally redefined what freedom even means. We're talking, of course, about the American Revolution. It's super easy to picture the American Revolution as just muskets, powdered wigs, that sort of thing. But that's not the whole story, not even close. To really get it, you've got to see it as this massive global earthquake. And its aftershocks? Well, they literally created the world most of us are living in right now. I mean, for starters, it was the spark that lit the fuse on one of the most famous upheavals in all of history. Yeah, the French Revolution. In 1789, people in France looked across the ocean, saw that the American colonists had successfully challenged a king, and thought, hey, maybe we can do that too. And here's what was so absolutely radical about it. You have to remember, this was an age of kings, of emperors, of inherited power. And then suddenly, here comes the United States, founded on this wild idea that the people should rule, not some monarch. It was a massive experiment, and honestly, a lot of folks at the time were pretty sure it was going to fail, and fail hard. So that's the big question, right? The one we're going to dig into today. How did this collection of colonies, I mean, these were loyal subjects of the British Crown, how did they manage to take on a global superpower and build a completely new kind of nation from scratch? See, the roots of this revolution, they go way deeper than just a fight over taxes or tea. It really started with a massive shift in how people saw themselves. They stopped thinking of themselves as, just Europeans living abroad. They started to see themselves as something totally new, as Americans. Just think about the difference for a second. Back in Europe, society was this rigid pyramid. You were born into a certain spot, and that was pretty much your life, path set. But over in the American colonies, this totally new idea started to take hold. The idea that your success should depend on what you could do, on your merit, not who your parents were. That was a game changer. And this new American identity, it wasn't just a vague feeling. It was built on some really solid pillars. You had universities like Harvard, which was founded way back in 1636, promoting rational thinking. Religion was becoming a private matter, not something the state controlled. A really vibrant capitalist economy was popping up, creating all sorts of new opportunities. And maybe most importantly, there was no noble class. You basically had the rich and the poor. And for the first time, there was a real chance you could move from one group to the other. Okay, so you've got this new American identity getting stronger and stronger. But at the same time, the British Empire's economic grip was getting tighter and tighter. The whole system was based on this idea called mercantilism. And really, all you need to know about that is that it meant one thing. The colonies existed for the sole purpose of making the mother country, Great Britain, rich. And the rules were, well, they were pretty simple, but also incredibly restrictive. So, Rule 1, all trade had to be on British ships. Rule 2, if you grew something valuable, like sugar, tobacco, or cotton, you could only sell it to Britain. And Rule 3, if you needed to buy certain manufactured goods, like iron tools or wool clothes, you had to buy them from Britain. It was this perfect closed loop, all designed to funnel wealth from the colonies straight into Britain's pockets. So what changed? Well, the 7 Years' War. It's this huge conflict from 1756 to 1763. Britain wins, they beat their arch rival France, and they secure all this territory in North America. Sounds great, right? Well, the victory came with a huge price tag, a staggering amount of debt. And when Britain looked around for who was going to help pay that bill, their eyes landed right on the American colonists. And that decision to solve its debt problem on the backs of the colonists, well, that lit the fuse. What started out as simple protests against taxes was about to spiral, and spiral fast, into a full-blown revolution. I mean, just look at how quickly things fell apart. We're talking about a single decade here. In 1764, you get new taxes, like the Sugar Act, and they force colonists to house British soldiers. A year later, the Stamp Act hits, a direct tax on pretty much all paper goods. That causes a huge uproar. By 1770, tensions boil over and you get the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fire into a crowd. Then in 73, the colonists strike back with the Boston Tea Party. And Britain's response? They bring down the hammer with what the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, shutting down Boston's port and banning political meetings. Every single event was another step up the ladder of conflict. And all of this anger, this frustration, it all got boiled down into one simple, powerful slogan: no taxation without representation. The colonists' whole argument was this: Since we don't get to elect anyone to sit in the British Parliament, that Parliament has absolutely no right to take our money. It was a really profound argument about who has the right to govern. So by 1776, things had gone too far. The relationship was just broken. There was no going back. The leaders in the colonies looked at the situation and came to a stunning conclusion. The only way forward was to break away completely, a total separation from Great Britain. And that brings us to July 4th, 1776. That's the day the Second Continental Congress took a step they could never take back. They adopted the Declaration of Independence. And you got to understand, this wasn't some polite request. This was a defiant shout to the entire world saying, we're done. These 13 colonies are now a new independent nation, and we are ready to fight for it. Of course, declaring you're independent is one thing, but winning it on the battlefield, that's a whole different ballgame. What came next was years of brutal, bloody war. You had George Washington's brand new, often ragtag Continental Army going up against the full might of the British Empire, literally one of the most powerful military forces on the entire planet. It was a long, incredibly difficult struggle. And let's be honest, with a lot of crucial help from Britain's enemies like France, the Americans actually pulled it off. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris made it official. Great Britain formally recognized the United States as an independent nation. So the war was over. They'd won. But the real, lasting legacy of the revolution, it wasn't found on the battlefield. It was in the completely new ideas about government, about freedom, that the United States was about to unleash on the world. What they created was basically a brand new blueprint for how to build a nation. Think about it. An elected president instead of a king. A Bill of Rights specifically to protect people from their own government. A single written constitution that was the supreme law of the land. The idea of federalism, sharing power between the national and state governments. And a formal separation of church and state. I mean, in the 18th century, these ideas weren't just new, they were absolutely mind-blowing. Which kind of leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? So many of the freedoms that we just take for granted today, the right to vote, to say what we think, to worship however we want, these things didn't just happen by accident. They are the direct result of a really radical experiment that kicked off with the Declaration of Independence over 200 years ago. So the real question for us today is, how well are we actually living up to those ideals?